Am I basically a busker now? Sure. But I gotta be less annoying than the guy with no rhythm that plays the bongos in your town. Yeah, every town's got one. Support the habit at patreon.com/doseofbuckley. As I write this, it's 30 degrees Celsius, 86 Fahrenheit in my hometown here in good old Canada. The reason I'm telling you this is so that you understand that Canada isn't some frozen hellscape where everyone has to wear layers all the time and we can't have sex with each other because it's too cold to ever be naked, even in our own homes. And yet, we seem to have a little bit of an incel problem. The last two major Canadian incidents involving incels, those who identify as involuntarily celibate, they can't find someone to fuck them, both happened just a couple hours away from me in good old Toronto, the place Drake calls the Six. With the 2018 van attack, that piece of shit, by the way, still hasn't went to trial, and just this February, a 17-year-old walked into what the news is calling an adult massage parlor, so a rub and tug, a handjob hut, the old happy ending hotel, and stabbed a woman with a machete to death before one of the other women wrestled it away from him and stabbed him with it. So when police got there, he was laying on the sidewalk bleeding. The news said he ended up in the hospital with life-threatening injuries. So you could say the woman who stopped him gave this story a bit of a happy ending as well. Now, quick aside, I know this won't be popular, but this is why the argument for, oh, even if gun control worked, people will kill people without guns, is so flimsy. Yes, they certainly will. But if someone walked into a massage parlor with a gun, they probably would have killed more people. When your weapon of choice can be wrestled away from you by a sex worker who's probably on no sleep and weighs like 115 pounds, sure, she's probably got stronger forearms than Popeye, but anyway, I have so many questions. How does 17-year-old with a machete get inside in the first place? And then get into a back room alone with a woman, all with no one noticing? Unfortunately, these are questions we may never see answered publicly, since under Canadian law, once this thing goes to court, in like 3 fucking years, God, we suck, they may not be able to report on much because he was a minor at the time. But what we do know is that they found out the kid was a follower of the incel ideology, and that he apparently admitted he wanted to hurt as many women as possible. And so, even though his first time will continue to be delayed indefinitely, there is a first time to come out of this case after all. This is the first time an incel has been charged with terrorism. In fact, it's the first time someone who wasn't specifically an Islamist extremist has been charged in Canada as a terrorist. What a step forward in equality. And so, Canada's decided, time to treat incels the same way women do. We won't fuck around with them either, eh? And in Canada, a crime committed with the backing of an ideology is considered terrorism. They originally charged the little non-fucker with first-degree murder for the woman he killed, and attempted murder for the woman that he stabbed that got his weapon away from him and stabbed him back. Then I assume they found some shit on his computer, or they got a tip from someone that he probably had an account on some forum. The article mentions that a source said he was familiar with the 2018 van attack and Elliot Rodger, their personal pale, wispy god, and they've upgraded it to murder terrorism. What does this mean? Well, I couldn't find much info on this other than a first-degree murder charge in Canada has a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years before a chance at parole, while a terrorism charge has no minimum, which technically means they could give fewer years? I'd fucking hope not, and I hope they don't charge or sentence this puke as a minor. But if they investigate this the same way they investigate terrorism, could they attempt to pull in co-conspirators and the people who they believe radicalized him? And what could that mean? If they find he was on some forum talking about how he wanted to stab a woman at a rub and tug, and you got Sword Art Online fan 69420 going, yeah, you should fucking do it. Are they now an accessory? A part of his terror cell? That would be a pretty interesting development, though it could have the effect of making things worse, because obviously, for the most part, they're just sad virgins crying on the internet to other sad virgins, saying shit like, imagine being with a bunch of kids and they all receive a candy, but you don't. They deny it from you. The result is rage. It's biological. As I talked about in my first video about incels, their belief that sex and women are the same as candy, a commodity that should be available to everyone, handed out, and that if you don't get a candy, you've been denied something that everyone should be having. One of the sticky threads on one of their main forums talks about how they hate the incels that become violent. If they're going to be left alone by women, they also want to be left alone by the media, certainly the police, etc., to spout their stupid nonsense like, women should be viewed as property. Like, actually reading this shit, I don't see how it is much different than radicalizing people with perversions of various religions for other types of terrorism. This guy goes on to talk about what medieval lords did, not realizing that in medieval times, guys like these would have been slaves, peasants, squires if they were lucky, or just dead from drinking tainted well water. They wouldn't have been lords and knights like they imagine. Once again, this guy in Toronto lost a fight, while armed, to someone they view as inferior. But for those of you who might be listening, I went through this in my previous video, but sex isn't everything. And to throw your whole life away at 17 because you haven't gotten laid yet? Because you watched movies and listened to idiots in high school locker rooms that said you're not a real man if you haven't had sex before you're out of high school or whatever? You've made your whole identities about one thing, one relatively meaningless aspect of life. And no one cares that you've never had sex but you. And if someone insults you by calling you a virgin, they don't care that you've never had sex. They know it bothers you, so that's why they do it. You realize that bullies are just what we called trolls before the internet, right? And I said it before and I'll say it again. It wouldn't solve any of your real mental or emotional problems. And it would probably make them worse when you have your first orgasm with another person involved and then wake up the next day only to find out, wow, nothing's changed. I don't really feel any different than I did yesterday. Stop focusing on that and find meaning in other things. But you know what? I got good news for the kid who's now been labeled a terrorist. Once you go to prison, you won't be an incel anymore. You'll finally get to have sex. Your first time might not quite be the way you imagined it, but hey, you won't be celibate anymore. And when you're traded for a carton of smokes to someone, maybe you'll have a different idea of what it's like to be considered property instead of a human fucking being.